Let's start with the news peg of the day, because I want to talk about 5 specific points which would actually be very interesting for our viewers. Firstly, diesel prices and petrol prices. Now, the government says that it's out of their hands. The prices are deregulated. They refuse to change that. But as each day passes, can millions just watch on? Is there anything any government, perhaps even your government, can do?
I think, Vishnu, first of all, let me say that the central government, the NDA government, has raised the petrol central excise 9 times since it came to office. 9 times. Let me also tell you that on February 1st, 2018, they said they will lower the excise duty by 2%. Excellent. You know, simultaneously what they did? They increased the cess by 2%. So in effect, there was no change, and the increasing the cess by 2% means that the states would be denied that money from coming in as what you call devolution. So it was a 2 birds killed in 1 stone. First, no change, 2% down, 2% up, and then deny the states. Let me also tell you, which will shock your viewers, that in April 2014, the central excise on petrol, for example, was 9 rupees 48 paise. Do you know what it is in July 2018? 19 rupees 48 paise. For diesel, 3 rupees 56% in 1st of April 2014 when this government comes to office. What is the diesel central excise today?
Okay.
15.33%. That means double petrol excise, double diesel, and during the time the international prices fell, the central government did not follow the market rule as you were suggesting.
Yeah, in fact,
the states, however, held on to their VAT level.
In fact, you raise an interesting point, and yesterday in Delhi, what was interesting was that the tax component in the price of petrol was actually more than the price of petrol itself. This was in Delhi. I don't know if it was true in other states, but the entire structure of taxes, whatever they may be, and whoever may control it, whether there can be any regulation on that or not is another issue. But my next question to you, Dr. Mitra, is this. The petroleum minister has said that he is in favor of including all petroleum products within GST. Obviously, the GST Council, of which you are a part, will need to decide on this. Is this, as a proposal, something that's acceptable to you?
Well, as far as GST is concerned, petroleum has been subsumed into the GST, but we took a conscious decision with centre and all state finance ministers that we will not include petroleum into GST till GST stabilizes. Now, you'll be interested to know how unstable the GST is today. During 2017-18, the loss to the states, which the centre had to compensate, was 48,178 crores. Number one. Number two, just in July, August, these last 2 months, the loss to the states has been 13,000 crores. That means 6,500 crores a month is what we are bleeding. Why? Because this is a completely truncated process. When you load a particular form called GST 3B, no invoices, which means there's racketeering, there is hawala, because there's no way to check. So it was all supposed to be electronic, and it was self-populating, they said.
Right.
I told them repeatedly, as chairman of the Empowered Committee at that time, please do not launch the GST on 1st of July by force from Parliament.
But
with
sir,
with destiny and all this show business.
Dr. Mitra, there's a counterpoint to this as well.
Till the
and
yes,
let me get your views on that. Inflation hasn't risen.
Sure.
There's a single national market. The tax base is widening. The problems with the electronic system are getting better. Issues related to exporters not receiving refunds, that's being looked at as well. So a lot of people would say, look, this is on its way. Whether we like it or not, we need to make it better. So there are 2 ways of looking at it, sir. Why do you say that it's all necessarily all bad?
The reason I'm saying that is that ask the state officers and they'll tell you We have gone to manual paper-based evaluation. Have you heard of that? Thousands of sheets of paper the officers are having to do because the GST network has not responded the way that all of us expected to respond, provided it was not brought into play absolutely hurriedly, unpreparedly. So what we are saying is, let GST stabilize, let the compensation to states go down because their losses go down, then you can look at any other item to bring into GST which is not in GST today. So my response to the Petroleum Minister is, please come and sit at the GST Council along with the Union Finance Minister, and you will know right away the consensus is let GST first stabilize instead of states bleeding in GST. I've given you the figures of what kind of losses.
Okay, sir, the other figures that would be interesting to look at are GDP growth. And the reason why we're talking about GDP growth now is because of the government's own statistics which are now emerging, where average GDP growth during the UPA decade was 8%, but average GDP growth in this NDA regime is 7.3%. But my question to you is this, sir. The IMF says, and I quote, the near-term macroeconomic outlook is broadly favorable. Growth is forecast to rise to 7.3% in 2018-2019 and 7.5% in 2019-22. Strengthening investment and robust private consumption. So that being the case, do we really need to look into these GDP rates which aren't catastrophically different from what they were earlier on?
They are catastrophically different. Why? When the NDA government came to office, the UPA's growth rate was 6.07 according to the new calculations done by the NDA government. It rose to 7.2, it rose to 8.1, excellent. And then you know what happened. Came demonetization. Plummeted from 8.1% to 7.1%. Then plummeted further down to 6.7% in 2017-18. And you know what the future looks like. 2018 will be 7.3 according to several studies. And 2019-20 will be 7.5.
Yes, that's what the IMF also says. So you're blaming it entirely on the demonetization process. And I take the point that you're mentioning.
I think there are two processes.
Yes. Yes.
No, also GST. Also, please understand GST is involved. I'll give you the alternative. Bengal's GDP in 2017-18 grew, according to the central government, by 10.2%. India grew by 5.7%. Same thing in industry. India grew by 5.54%. Bengal grew by 16.29%. And I'm not saying that. Statistical CSO of the central government says that.
All right, but Dr. Mitra, there is
can create these problems.
Okay.
Yeah, yes.
But Dr. Mitra, since you do point out problems with GST and with demonetization, those who say that, look, here's a counter argument. Those who say that the UPA in the past had more robust GDP growth would also argue that robust GDP growth was because of conditions in the global economy which were far more buoyant, and this had a bearing on India as well. Conditions when this government came into power globally were not quite the same, and therefore it would perhaps not have been that easy or easy enough for this government to have matched that GDP growth.
I hear the argument, certainly. But let me submit to you, you spoke of inflation. IMF prediction for inflation this year of consumer price index, and your consumers would be interested to know, is 5.2%. So you're going to get inflationary pressure. Now, rupee, as you know, has absolutely weakened to a point where now it's threatening possible inflationary processes, which will then lead to increase in interest rate by the RBI, and then all that follows with regard to investment demand. Let me also submit to you, foreign exchange reserves have come down. Are you aware of that?
Yeah, $221 million.
To 62-month high, first time. And therefore, what I am submitting to you is that all the indicators put together, you start with the inflation, you go to foreign exchange reserves, you go to the and a current account deficit. Do you know what it is? 2.8% of GDP.
But sir, again, if you were to turn
these markers,
if you were to turn this particular argument around, India is not responsible for surging global crude prices. Yes, there is a problem with the current account of deficit, also low exports. But how would you respond to those who say that there are international factors at play and that is just a matter of time before the rupee corrects itself and the larger issue of our basic economic fundamentals are still sound?
I think it's very important to understand that 2008, a financial meltdown took place. Everybody knows that. India, under the government at that time, protected itself against the largest meltdown in the world. How did they do it? Raghuram Rajan will tell you. The then government will tell you. So just because international conditions may turn against you in some manner, for you in some other areas, it's the maturity and wisdom of the government that produces effective policies to take the economy forward. And what I find here is knee-jerk reactions. You first do demonetization, nobody knows about it. The economy, the growth rate of your own growth rate, which plummets. Then you do GST by force, kar lenge, attitude. And then you do GST, and that results in the small and medium enterprises, and of course wipes out the demonetization, wipes out the informal sector. Employment growth plummets.
Yes.
Today it is very interesting, and you'll be interested to know, ILO study says that in 2019 we will have 1.89 crores of unemployeds. Why? Because you have a peculiar kind of growth which is not producing employment.
Okay, Dr. Mitra.
Do you know that in West Bengal the highest bank lending in India is MSME? 44,000 crores, and we are now going to cooperative banks to help.
Okay, now Dr. Mitra,
that creates jobs.
Dr. Mitra, I want to debate a couple of these points that you're mentioning with my panel. I know you want this to be a one-on-one interview, but one final question to you before I do move on. And we can debate this one point a lot, but let's talk a little bit about stressed assets. Now, would you agree that on the one hand, we've got a tough new law, we want strong legislation in removing stressed assets, we have that legislation now, but on the other hand, dozens of companies may now be forced into bankruptcy court, and that doesn't necessarily mean that the system will immediately get its money back. So it seems to be a two-sided problem. Do we have the laws? Yes, we finally do. Do we want our money back? It won't happen so soon. But is there really any reason to criticize a government which is trying to bring back all this money that's due?
I always appreciate governments which are trying, but you must know that in 2014, non-performing assets of Indian banks was 2 lakh crores. By 2018, it becomes 10.2 lakh crores. Now, you mentioned stressed assets. Stressed assets in India, unfortunately, and I'm so embarrassed to say that today IMF says India is #1 in the world in the worst case scenario of stressed assets of 14.7 lakh crores. 14.7 lakh crores. Italy apparently is number 2 with 14.4 lakh crores.
Yeah.
I want to know from you whether these activities that you just mentioned, 70 companies may go under on the 28th, which is today.
Yes.
Now, the government has to work with Reserve Bank of India, with the stakeholders. Stakeholders are afraid to borrow money today. Bankers are not ready to give. They're risk averse.
All right.
Because of this massive process. Government has to lead from the front.
I think the bigger question at this stage, Dr. Mitra, is what exactly happens, since, as you point out, that deadline is effectively over now. What happens to those companies? Will the government actually get around to taking action, working with the system? But irrespective of that, I'd like to thank you very much for joining us, because we're also joined at this stage